So today's topic is eating better. And after 35 years of working in private practice and teaching and studying and doing research and writing, this is what I have come to understand. That this is the goal, something as simple as eating better. And so what I want to do is share with you a couple of the ideas I have about what that means. Because as we keep evolving and learning more, the food supply is more and more complex. Ideas about how to eat become more and more controversial. And people tend to get more and more defensive or combative about the right way to eat. And if there's anything that I've learned is that there is no one right way to eat. It's really about figuring out what approach to food works best for you. So in that spirit, I want to share some ideas about eating better that may work for you. And of course, that tagline, this is all about getting your body to effectively burn both glucose and fat for fuel. Now, a lot of times you would think, okay, it's because of that cosmetic thing. We're all, concerned about our weight, and certainly there's a health component, but I'll be honest with you. After 35 years of private practice, most of the people come into my office, yes, they want to be healthier, but they also like to be leaner. They want to feel better in their clothes. They want to move better. They just, would enjoy a leaner body. And a lot of times they don't understand that the real crux of that is helping your body burn fat for fuel. So like I said, the issues are a little more complex today, but we're going to start with the basics, and then we're going to go beyond the basics. So, how did you guys do? Did you survive the eating season? It's not over. We've got Super Bowl Sunday, and then we've got Valentine's Day, and I think it continues to tumble. And that's really the challenge that we have today, that we live in 24/7 harvest all the time. We have too much food available to us all the time, whether we can afford it or not. We live with abundance, and we all have to learn how to survive abundance. So I'm not sure about you, but a lot of people try to do that New Year's resolution thing. I wish I should make up one for women, right? This is obviously a guy writing this, but or maybe it's not a guy, maybe it's a gay woman. I don't know. But the bottom line is, we can all resonate with that idea that we're constantly in that mode of trying to improve ourselves. Do something to move forward, enhance our health, enhance our well-being, trying to create an environment and a self that functions well. So I'm not sure whether you're resolution makers or not. How many of you here are resolution makers? Interesting. Many people aren't. I'm with you. I find that resolutions sometimes don't work out as well. Most of the time don't work out as well. And so I think changing and developing a new strategy is a good idea. Because too many people live in this world back and forth, and some people just live in a place where they're consistently frustrated, not quite meeting their expectations. And that's a tough place to live, where you don't meet your expectations. But which strategy? I mean, this is really what's so crazy today. I've been around long enough to know what it was like to be in the high carbohydrate, low fat world, to be in the high protein, low carbohydrate world, and now to be in gluten-free and organic and paleo and vegetarian and vegan, and it's all over the map. And I noticed that probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I said, oh my gosh, this is going to tumble out of control. And that's where we are, where there's just so many messages about what to eat and what is the right way to eat, that people are really struggling to figure out what works for them. So, what do we want to know? We want to know that our diet drives everything when it comes to our well-being in our body and that core issue that's linked to disease, inflammation. But I will tell you, it's not just about weight gain. This is one of the core miscues out there in most of the public health messaging. They want you to believe that, or if somebody's got the idea that if you gain weight, that is the problem. The reality is, anytime you're eating in a way that drives inflammation, whether you gain weight or not, this is linked to disease. Thin and thick people struggle with heart disease, blood pressure, diabetes, cancer. Weight is not the end-all be-all. It's really where you store the weight, and it's that deep visceral fat. So if you're, got a family heritage like mine where you just tend to store it all here in the belly, not so great for living in harvest. Really good if you're trying to survive scarcity. It worked about 5,000 years ago. And it works in many areas of the world today where people still are struggling to survive scarcity. So you wonder how people live off of 500 calories a day. This very efficient, capable metabolism is what allows them to survive scarcity. Doesn't work for us, it doesn't work for us so well when we have so much available to us, and food is available 24/7. So the bottom line is, it's excess calories, but it also may be the wrong kind of excess calories. Maybe it's too much of sugar. Maybe it's too much, even something people think of as healthy as fruit juice or licuados or smoothies. It can be too much trans fat, even though total fat is not excessive. It can be too much refined starch, even though we think of starch as a complex carbohydrate. But if it's refined, it kind of works a whole lot like sugar. Maybe it's excessive amount of alcohol. So it's not even just always too many calories. Sometimes it's too many of the wrong kind of calories. And what occurs is when we consume these, if our body responds by becoming what we call hyperglycemic, that means too much sugar in the blood, even temporarily, the body responds by secreting insulin. And if the body has to secrete a lot of insulin in response to these foods, that's what increases that inflammation, increases the fat stores. Even if you don't become overweight, just increasing more of those fat stores in the deep visceral spaces, the belly spaces, that make us more vulnerable to disease. And oftentimes drives the desire to even eat more, drives the desire to eat those kinds of foods. So regardless of whether we're thick or thin, the idea is we want to move forward and enjoy better health and a leaner body and be more comfortable in our skin. The idea is to eat better. What does that mean? Well, the basics focus on three things. And if you've heard me speak over the last couple years, I've talked about these things before. So it'll be a review for those of you who have heard me before. It'll be new for maybe a few of you. Those three components of eating better, the basics, include discussions about what you eat, food composition, when you eat, how you put that food through the day, and how much you eat. How much is enough? So those are the three basics that we want to stick with. So when it comes to what to eat, it could be very simple. It can be as simple as a balance of preferentially whole foods. Whole foods. Whole fruits and vegetables. Meats, poultry, fish if you eat animal products. Cheese, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes if you don't. Maybe all of the above if you're a classic omnivore. But whole foods, preferentially. That means oftentimes eating enough protein. Not everybody does, and you feel the effects. And some of us need more protein than others. I'm one of those people. I'll be honest with you, I grabbed a latte after lunch today because a salad, no matter how many eggs and how much bacon and how much cheese I put on that salad, that was not enough protein for me. I was kind of like not ready to speak to you, at least coherently. So I needed another 8 grams of protein that I could get from a cup of milk. Some of you will do beautifully on a baked potato. There's not one right way. The challenge is for you to figure out what that balance is for you and to learn how to read your body to know what you need. So the idea is enough protein, but that's enough for you. It's a moderate amount of starchy carbohydrates because it's really easy to overconsume the starchy carbohydrates. They're relatively cheap and they're abundant in our food supply. Ideally, we get more of our carbohydrates from whole foods, whole fruits and vegetables. And the idea is that we complement these whole foods with enough healthy fats. Why is it so valuable to get that balance? It's because of how it helps us to feel satisfied over time, to really give us the energy to focus and function well throughout our day. So when you eat carbohydrate, some people find that, where's my light? There it is, that it burns really fast. And for some people, they're going to notice it more than others. There's this great study on kids. They gave all these kids a high carbohydrate diet. Some of those kids felt really great, satisfied 3-4 hours until it was time to eat another meal. Other kids were feeling hungry and unsettled within a half hour. That's a really dramatic difference between children, and it's even just as dramatic, if not more so, for those of us as we age. So figure out that carbohydrates were really never designed to last very long. They're very quick-burning fuels. So if for you, you find that you get hungry too soon after eating carbohydrate, if you had the oatmeal this morning and you found yourself hungry at 9 or 10 o'clock, maybe you need more protein. If you felt great all the way through, maybe you don't need so much. Those are your cues. When you need more protein and you feel satisfied longer, you'll know it as soon as you combine the carbohydrate and protein together. So when people combine carbohydrate and protein, oftentimes they can feel satisfied 3+ hours, depending on the portions, of course. And experiment, because adding fat to your meal can help you feel satisfied even longer. This is where we get to own what works best for us. If you're choosing whole foods and you're choosing foods that are nutrient dense, there's lots of room to experiment here and find that balance that works best for you. But this is not what's happening in the American supermarket. When we look at public health data and we look at the USDA data, what we find is that more and more people are spending more and more money on highly processed foods and sweets. They're spending more money on beverages. They're spending more money on grains and baked goods. If you count those 3 segments in the shopping cart, processed foods and sweets, the grains and baked goods, and the beverages, that's over 50% of the total calories in someone's diet, or that's available in the food supply. Not necessarily someone's diet, but what's available in the food supply. That's a lot of carbohydrate, and it's a lot of refined carbohydrate. And that's the kind of carbohydrate that drives that hyperinsulinemia, and probably one of the reasons why there's so many people struggling with so many different levels of health, as well as energy metabolism, because that kind of carbohydrate intake is what drives the insulin resistance. So it'll be interesting to see if this changes. What will this look like in 2022? Are we going to see people stepping back and eating more whole foods, using their dollars to purchase more fruits and vegetables, using their dollars to purchase more beans and legumes and meats and dairy, the kind of whole nutrient-dense foods that are different than what people are spending their money on today? There are lots of plans out there guiding people in terms of how to eat. There's the My Plate plan, which is still basically a higher carbohydrate, low-fat plan. There's a Mediterranean diet that emphasizes a little bit more fat, maybe up to 30-40% fat in the diet. I use this tool squaring off of the food pyramid because I found the food pyramid didn't work for a whole lot of people. But it's really open. You know, there's rectangles there because I work with a different balance for different people. So I use that tool because it is so flexible. And then, you know, certainly we've got plenty of attention out there addressing paleo and some of the other plans that are much, much stronger in protein and fat. Again, there's no one right way to eat. I'm not here to tell anybody that there is. My encouragement is to figure out what balance works for you. Let that understanding of how food helps you to feel satisfied over time, gives you energy over time, let that be a template for you to experiment with, to find out that, you know, if you have more protein in the morning, you may feel more satisfied throughout the day. If you have enough carbohydrate through the day, you might feel more clear-headed, more focused. If you have enough fat in your meal, you'll feel yourself feeling satisfied longer. Those are insights about how food can work for you that you can use as you figure out what approach to food works best. The second concept is about eating through the day. Today is a perfect example of that. I don't know about you, but I got to be up at 4:45 this morning in order to get here in time. That is a long time to wait for lunch at noon. And I was about losing it. Sometime about 11:30, 11:45, and pulled out a little bag of nuts out of my bag because I know better. I know better than to get over hungry. A lot of people don't, especially earlier in the day. It's really easy to use your epinephrine, that kind of fight or flight response, to get yourself to go through the morning on too little food, only to tap out your glycogen stores, that store of energy that's in your liver that serves your brain. And then once you tap that out, you're kind of chasing it all day long. So one of the biggest concerns I have for people is that they don't eat throughout their day. They eat too little in the morning. They tap out their glycogen stores through, before they ever get to lunch, or maybe a little bit through the rest of the early, late afternoon. And then they spend from late afternoon until evening trying to restore. And this is probably what I facetiously call the American way. Far too many people eat very, very little before 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and 2/3 or 3/4 of their food intake come in snacks in the later afternoon, dinner itself, and then everything they eat after dinner until they go to bed. No wonder you're not hungry the next morning. And the cycle repeats. Unfortunately, it's a setup because you upload your calories at the end of the day. Your body really doesn't have anything else to do with them but store them. So you store your calories. Plus, if you're eating that much before you go to bed, you basically trip up the capacity for your body to use fat for fuel through the night. Your body has to reach a fasting state in order to effectively burn fat for fuel through the sleeping hours. If you've overeaten from dinner through the 11 o'clock news, you won't be able to do that. And some people find that out the hard way. They eat at night, they go, oh, you really shouldn't have had that. They're feeling bad about how much they did eat at night, and then they wake up the next morning and they're starving. They're like, wait a minute. How unfair is that? To overeat the night before and then wake up the next morning starving? What is that? That's a sign that your body never got into fasting state. Never got to the place where it's burning fat effectively for fuel. So you tap out of the blood glucose and you tap out your glycogen stores and you wake up hungry. So unfair. So unfair. People find that when they eat adequately through their day, and most critically, avoid getting over hungry, their energy level is more stable. They often feel satisfied after dinner. They don't need to snack as much in the evening. And they have an easier time managing their weight, even losing fat weight, if that's their goal. So working with your body this way, fueling it through the day, not trying to save calories. That's kind of really old diet thinking. Is to eat as little as possible through the day, only to get over hungry or tap out those glycogen stores and then feel like you're craving carbohydrates and sugars. So through the day. Doesn't matter 3 times a day, 6 times a day, 2 meals and 2 snacks. I don't care. There's no gospel about this. There's no specific right way to eat. But if you can eat periodically so that you avoid getting over hungry, in this environment of abundance, it will work better. And the third cornerstone, or third of that tripod of those basics, is honoring how much is enough. And it was interesting. I was talking with a young woman at lunch today, and I get how challenging this is. I will say most of my clients do know when they're hungry. How many of you know when you're hungry? Yeah, do you have a good sense when you're hungry? Okay, not everybody. And what about enough? How many of you know when you've had enough? Okay, fewer. And that's not unusual. And I won't ask that other question, like how many of you struggle to honor that place of how much is enough? Because that's the other thing. You can know when's enough, but not really pay attention. So this challenge of enough, one of the reasons it's so tricky, and even knowing when you're hungry is so tricky, is that the body's cues of hunger and satiety, they're actually very subtle. Until you're starving. Then it's, very insistent. But the basic signals of hunger and enough are very subtle signals. And something as powerful as stress will steamroll right over them. So when we live with a stressed environment, and I don't mean catastrophic stress. This is not, after the earthquake. This is, I don't have enough time to get somebody off to school and eat breakfast and get to work on time. Or I can't find my keys. Or where did I put my glasses? Or you want me to do that report again. Or anything else that presses you more than you anticipated. That kind of chronic stress, as well as the big S stress, that kind of dynamic triggers the release of a cascade of hormones. The big heavy hitter being cortisol, that literally steamrolls any of these other more subtle cues. So under chronic stress, under extreme stress, it is exquisitely challenging to determine when you're hungry and when you're satisfied. So know that that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is trying to calm ourselves enough to determine when we are truly hungry and not over-hungry. Because all too many people say, I know when I'm hungry, but what they're picking up is that over-hungry place, not the more subtle cues. And when we feel satisfied. One of the most critical things that I find a lot of people struggle with is what does it mean to be satisfied? And I will say that sometimes that has to be experimented with. It's not easy to know that place where you could stop eating, but you could also have a few bites more. You could also finish the last few bites off of your kid's plate. Or you could finish all those few bites because you really don't want to put it in a container and put it in the refrigerator, and you can't find the lid anyway. Most people stabilize their weight when they're eating between satisfied and full most of the time. How often do we eat till we're full consistently? And overfull occasionally or more often than not. That is a recipe for weight gain. That is a recipe for inflammation, even if you don't gain weight. Because it's more than your body needs. At least you don't gain weight everywhere. Maybe you have that, little belly. Maintenance between satisfied and full, back and forth, stabilize there. And fat loss, most effective fat loss, that place of just enough. Ooh, it's kind of hard because you really could eat a few more bites. You really want to eat a few more bites. It's uncomfortable to stop right now. And what I will say is that in order to really touch that place, the most effective gift you could give yourself is about 10 to 15 minutes to go do something else. Make a phone call, go clean out a drawer, I don't care. You maybe, feeling like a lunatic, but give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to give your body the chance to settle. And then experience what it's like to have your body say, you know what, I am okay. Or not. Maybe your body say, you know what, that really wasn't enough. I need to go eat the rest of that chicken breast. Or I need to go finish off that little bit of vegetable that I put in the refrigerator after I found the lid. The important piece here is to allow yourself to slow down the process so you can figure it out. So you can figure out how much is enough. It is something I continue to work today. Doesn't matter how many degrees I have, doesn't matter how long I've been doing this work with clients. It is still a conscious and consistent effort because we live in this environment of abundance, because food is available to us 24/7, and oftentimes more than we need. So the challenge is there. Okay, so let's get beyond the basics, because that's core, and you can work with that and work with it and refine it literally for the rest of your life. But I think what's really front and center for us today is that the challenges we have with the food supply and the challenges we have in nutrition are beyond those core behaviors of how much we eat, what we eat, and when we stop. The real critical piece that we're beginning to realize today is it's equally important to determine how our food is grown. And that's pretty shocking. 20 years ago, people weren't all that conscious about this. I will say 40 years ago when I was in school, no one was really conscious about it. That basic nutrition textbook didn't have anything written about how food was grown. I taught nutrition for 15 years at UCLA in Santa Monica. None of our textbooks talked about how food is grown. And yet that is front and center for us today for a lot of reasons. So that's one I want to spend a little bit of time with, and then we'll have time for questions. All these issues, the antibiotics, the hormones, the pesticides, the other herbicides and chemicals used in our food supply, the opposite side of the road, the organic, the grass-fed, the local, the pastured, GMO-free, all of these components of our food supply are controversial for a reason. And the tough part about it is that not only are they controversial, but we don't have all the information. So it's really hard to determine what is the right thing to do because all the information isn't in place. We don't have all the research that we would like to have. But there's no denying it that there are substances in our environment that are influencing the health of our bodies and the healthfulness of our food supply. So I'm going to focus on two of them. It's the pesticides and toxics. I'm not doing such a good with this. And the biologicals, okay? All of these things impact our bodies. They impact the bodies of our children. They impact the bodies of our babies. Now, there's studies out there showing that cord blood, human cord blood, that's the blood supply between mama and baby in utero. They can detect 287 different chemicals that are contaminants that are being delivered to the baby while baby's growing inside. That wasn't always. But our environment's changed tremendously. So today, I don't talk just about nutrients in food. I talk about environmental nutrition. It's a much bigger scope of the issues. It's about the nutrients, but it's how we're delivering the nutrients and what do we do to our environment in order to get those nutrients. So it addresses all the different chemicals that are applied to our foods. It addresses the chemicals that are given to the food animals. It impacts the healthfulness and the ecological health of our soil, our water, and our air. And it impacts the entire ecosystem of our planet. So that's a big order to address with what we choose at the marketplace. Now, at this point, I want to stop because this is an area that is really confronting because in order to avoid a lot of these substances, cost a lot of money. I did a study about 2 years ago looking at the cost of food. And the cost of all the refined grains and sugars that are available in our food supply, from soda to candy to refined bread and chips and those kind of things, 6 to 20 cents per 100 calories. As soon as I went to the cheapest fruits and vegetables, carrots, apples, and oranges in season, the cost was between 60 and 80 cents per 100 calories. When I went to look at grass-fed beef, wild-caught salmon, and organic fruit, the cost was between $1.50 and $2 per 100 calories. So I carry with me a consciousness that in order to step forward to this arena of ecological nutrition, it is going to challenge everybody. It's going to challenge every restaurateur. It's going to challenge every industrial source of food. It's going to challenge every food manufacturer. It's going to challenge everyone who purchases food in the marketplace. So we have a big issue there because our food supply has changed dramatically over the last 70 years, and how we've grown it has changed dramatically for the last 70 years. So I don't want anybody to feel bad or guilty or anxious that they can't get here because they can't afford this food. The challenge is for when you can or as you can to step forward because it's got to change. We're polluting our water, we're polluting our soil, we're compromising the biological activity of our soil. We can't keep growing food this way, and food's not going to stay this cheap. Right now, the average family is spending 7% of their take-home pay on their food. Now, that's average, but it's 7%. It's very low. Most Western countries in Europe, like Germany and France and those countries, they're spending 11 to 12% of their take-home pay on food. Italy, it's 16%. Many countries in Africa, it's 45 to 50% of their income on food. And in some places, it's 100% of their income because they're barely able to buy food or get the food they need. So we have been skewed. You know, our perception, our expectation is skewed. We expect food to cost a certain amount. And if we're going to take care of the soil and the land and the animals, we're going to be paying more, just like we're paying more for eggs today. We're paying more. But we've got to, weigh that with, is it worth it to be paying more? And given the fact that we're going to depend on this soil to grow our food, we're going to depend on this air to breathe, I think we all have to consider what it means to be able to eat better. So, what we have to know is that 95% of the contaminants that enter our body come from the food supply. That's how they get into us. All of us have a body burden of these contaminants. There's nobody that was measured, no pregnant woman that was measured that had no contaminants in her cord blood. And anybody that's ever been tested, I know they have a huge testing facility at Berkeley, nobody's been tested clean. So these contaminants come into the water supply or come into the soil, and crops are grown. So even if you're vegan or vegetarian, there is a toxic load in those products. Now, it's typically higher in animals because of what we call bioaccumulation. So probably the number one issue is we kind of need to clean up our act in terms of how we manufacture things and how we take care of waste. But this is the mechanism by which all of us carry these toxic substances. So the language of food has changed tremendously, trying to mitigate or trying to decrease the exposure of these toxicants. And that's why you'll have people talk about whole food. So there's less additives in food that's processed. Talk about vegetarian feed so that animals aren't fed other animals with risk of cross-contamination. So that animals are given exposure to more space, so there's not as much capacity for infection and the need for more antibiotics. So that animals are fed their natural diet, so that the nutrient concentration is what it can be. And a process of growing crops and managing feed animals so that the nutrients are cycled through the system. The output of farming, of the crops and the biomass, is used to feed the animals, who produce manure that's used to fertilize the soil in a process we call biodynamic. And this changing language of food is reflecting the changing environment in which we recognize our food can be better, and we can all eat better. So what are these core issues? Well, one of them is the antibiotic use. I saw a documentary called Resistance at UCLA School of Medicine. So this is not, a fly-by-night operation, and it's not hysterical. But I'm listening to the head of infectious disease at UCLA in tears, telling me that he can't treat people today that he used to be able to successfully treat 5 years ago because of antibiotic resistance. And so one of the primary places they want to go is to have animals raised without antibiotics as part of their feed, kind of a prophylactic way of decreasing microbes and decreasing risk of disease when animals are confined in these really large feedlot environments. The FDA has pushed forward to say voluntarily we need to change. The good news is that there is a lot of voluntary movement. There's a lot of farms and a lot of people who are moving forward to using less and less, but it will probably take a lot more for us to really step away from using antibiotics in feed with animals to reduce their risk of disease. And that's one of the first things that's out there, is that we need to, that will continue to plague us because of the risk in healthcare overall. And the doctors are very, very anxious about that. So we'll see that continue to be an issue. Another issue will be this whole question about how much beef. Ironically, there's a great deal of misinformation about beef because there's really two beef supplies. There's a beef supply that's grown in the CAFO model, where there's a lot of really nasty practices. There's CAFO beef, where the practices are actually far more responsible. And then there's the whole idea of grazing beef, grazing cows, and producing grass-fed beef. We're going to need to address that because cows themselves inherently don't destroy the carbon or don't destroy the atmosphere. If animals are grazed, they actually can be part of the solution to climate change. They can actually sequester that carbon in the soil. So we've got a lot of things to think about when it comes to what kind of meat we eat. And that's going to be hugely challenging. I mean, I walk into certain markets and see ground beef at 3 times the price of another market. That's a hard decision to make. Who wants to spend $8.99 a pound for ground beef when down the street you can pay $2.99? We're all going to be challenged with that. We're going to be challenged with what kind of produce we eat. And that also extends to the kind of animals that we eat, because so many of these fertilizers and pesticides are used on foods that are used to feed the animals in these CAFOs, the confined feeding operations. So there's this huge runoff that occurs every spring, where all these fertilizers flood into the Mississippi watershed and flood out into the Gulf and literally create a dead zone where nothing lives. Because all those fertilizers drive this huge buildup of algae, and it uses up all the oxygen, and then it all dies, and nothing lives. Literally in space that would be the extent of, or the size of Texas. So this will be another area of concern. And obesity is an issue as well. We know that the pesticides that we're using, like atrazine, the #1 pesticide used in plant foods, it is a huge factor in that Mississippi watershed. And one doctor out of India looked at these 2 pictures and said, there's something funny about this. The place of the greatest concentration of atrazine is also very close to the geographic region where there's the greatest concentration of obesity. Well, now we've got, I don't have that picture in the right place. This is the picture I wanted. We've got mice that were fed atrazine, and they found that with a certain dose of this pesticide, those mice were 10% heavier than the mice without. So we know that's an issue. There's certainly a lot of concern about glyphosate. This is the #1 herbicide in our food supply, and there's concerns that glyphosate is now found in our foods. About 10 years ago, the EPA allowed glyphosate to be sprayed directly on wheat and on barley as a way to dry the grain and harvest it so there would be less loss to mold. Not a bad reason, but now we have residues in our food. This has been going on for about 10 years. I know anecdotally, I've seen more and more clients with GI tract problems over these past 10 years. So much so that last year I wrote a blog, is it gluten or is it glyphosate? There's a huge question right now. All these people complaining about gluten sensitivity. There's some thought that it may be the glyphosate and not so much the gluten. And certainly there's a link with other disease states, from autism to obesity. Those questions have to be answered yet. They've only been projected as a possible issue. But what we see is increasing incidence of these disease states right alongside the increasing use of the glyphosate. What does that mean? We don't really know. So how we think about food and how we think about what we're eating, we're really challenged to rethink what our expectations are. How much should we be paying for food? What is going to be worth it to us? And this whole concept of biodynamic farming is a pretty profound concept where you use the waste product of one part of farming and contribute that to the next aspect of farming. It's being practiced on a few farms. Will it become widespread? I don't know. But I know that a lot of people are looking at trying to answer these questions. What does it mean to step forward and eat better in this arena? The bottom line is the marketplace is already changing. You'll see more and more organic. I'm sure if you're looking in your marketplace, you see more and more organic. You'll see more grass-fed available. You'll see more pastured eggs and poultry available. You'll see more foods that are local and sustainably grown. And there's a certain sector of the population that's willing to pay for that premium product. And so I think that the real challenge today is that a lot of producers can't produce enough. So we'll see how that goes. You'll see more of that change in sit-down restaurants as well. Now, I'm not sure what it's like in the Inland Empire, but I certainly know in West Los Angeles, it is commonplace to find grass-fed meat. It is commonplace to find organic produce on the menu. Not everywhere. You're still going to have a division. You know, there's still restaurants that celebrate giving you larger and larger portions. There's still restaurants that celebrate more is better. But there's other restaurants that are stepping up and addressing food differently, quality over quantity. And you're going to see that at fast food restaurants too. And it's very interesting how these changes are beginning to seep into every sector of the food supply. Whether you're talking about food that is supplied in industrial environments, whether it's cafeterias or school settings, or you're looking at what's happening at a fast food establishment. You know, I certainly know that there's a lot of these restaurants that are looking at how they can step forward and provide a food and a quality of food that takes care of the consumer and takes care of the planet at the same time. I think we're going to continue to see that happen over time. So you'll see more sustainable efforts. You'll see more seasonal efforts. You know, there's the opportunity to do that. You'll see more grass-fed. You'll see more attention to organic, because I think the big players realize this is a way that we can sustain the soil, the air, the water, those precious resources that are getting compromised right now. There was one study that I wrote about last year where they were able to take the best of conventional farming and the best of organic farming and reduce the toxicity of water 400%. They reduced the use of pesticides 85%. They reduced the use of fertilizers by 85%. It's an amazing, amazing effort. And the cost to the farmer was the same. The savings from not buying the pesticides and the fertilizers were offset by paying more for labor. There was actually even a little bit better return in terms of the production and the crops, and the cost was neutral. Now, this is the kind of forward thinking that's happening at our universities and in many ways to help all of us eat better. So, what's going to be your approach? You know, start where you can. Do what you can to eat better and enjoy that balance that's right for you. With that, thank you very much. I'll answer questions.